Welcome to today's podcast. Today, my guest is Jo-anne Hare. She is amazing. I first met Jo-anne at the Massage and My Therapy conference when she was announced as a Lifetime Member Award winner. Oh my goodness. I love everything about what she has done for our industry. So, as a woman in the late 70s, early 80s, she had a career in massage when it wasn't normal for not only women to have careers, but also massage wasn't really seen as a career. She just keeps showing up. She keeps showing up. She keeps showing up. She keeps showing up. She had setback after setback after setback after setback, and so much discrimination. And oh my goodness, it just listening to her story, I was just blown away by things that I would not expect to be happening today. And yet, things that she experienced from no, you couldn't possibly come. We thought you were a man. So because you're a woman, you can't come. And it just, oh, however, what I adore about her is that she experienced this injustice and she just kept standing and moving forward. It is because of people like Jo-anne that we have such an incredible industry and so well respected within the professional athlete sphere. And honestly, her story is just amazing. So yeah, cannot wait to share this with you. I hope you really enjoy it. She talks fast. So if you normally listen to podcasts on 1.5, I suggest you take it down to one because I was almost out of breath at the end of it. So enjoy. It might be time to, yeah, like I said, slow down your podcast a little bit. But yeah, really enjoy this really fast conversation with Jo-anne. Welcome, Jo-anne, to the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me. Thank you.
We first met at Massage and My Therapy Australia, and you have
Yes.
been inducted as a life member.
Yes.
Incredible work that you have done. Do you want to share a little bit about like how long have you been in the industry and what got you into massage?
My dad was a chiropractor osteopath, and so from a very early age, I was always in his rooms and used to do little things like back manipulations when I was little, walking on his back. I was always interested in body work, and I decided to do a massage course when I was about 17, 18. And because he had a clinic, I started working in there. And I just, as it progressed, I went back and did myotherapy. And that's how I got into massage. So I had a ready-made clinic. He was also head trainer at Hawthorn Football Club, so I was exposed to elite sports from a very early age. And I was fortunate enough to be able to go out and I guess hone my craft out there and learn all the good things whilst being under his guidance. So that was pretty good and got to meet a lot of people that I possibly wouldn't have been able to meet. And like everything, it's who you know, not what you know sometimes, and that opens doors. So that started what was an easy career for me to get into.
That's amazing. And was it really common for women to be in the industry back then? And to
No, when I first started massaging, I was still living at home and I had my parents' clinic number, which was also their home phone number. And for quite a few years, they used to get the dodgy phone calls at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning looking for that type of massage. And in the end, I had to get new business cards printed and get a new number because my parents were really cheesed off about it. And it was quite difficult because unless you were a sports trainer, massage back in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s was definitely not a thing to be doing. It wasn't considered a job. I remember my husband, who was my boyfriend, kept asking me when I was going to get a real job because it wasn't a job. And it was really only when I went back to RMIT and did myotherapy that it started to become more recognised.
yeah, okay. So how did you get into try that again. How did you go from working and training and massaging into swimming? How did
Yeah.
that come about?
Well, footballers are pretty smelly, and often you'd be treating them when they came off the training track, and I didn't really like the smell of liniment. I used to do a bit of work with Australian men's hockey, and they were a bit the same. And horse riders were a bit smelly, runners, everyone was a bit smelly. And I was a swimmer myself, and I remember going down to just a local swimming club, and I thought, wow, these guys smell of chlorine. They smell like domestos. They actually don't smell awful. So I started volunteering at swimming. And then I was approached by Rob Grant to go and work at Olympic Park. And at that time, I was working with the Western Bulldogs, who were Footscray, and Hawthorn Football Club at that stage. And I was quite keen to not work with footballers because they're such big blokes. Anyway, so when I went to work for Olympic Park, we had to choose a couple of sports to volunteer in. And I chose disabled sports and swimming, because the swimming was just next door basically from Olympic Park. And I really liked swimming. And as I said, they were all clean. I know that sounds silly, but when you're actually working for 6 or 8 hours in a row, nothing is quite, ugh, crutch smell and BO smells just yuck. So that's really the reason why I got into swimming, because they were clean. They smelled clean.
I think it's clever. It's brilliant. Like, why wouldn't you? How good. That's fantastic. And then how did it progress into working at the Olympic Games and things like that?
Yeah, so when you start working at Olympic Park or you start working with elite athletes, jobs are then advertised through a network, through a sporting network, to apply for teams. So I started applying for swimming competitions for teams to go with juniors and things like that. But at the same time, I'd been doing a lot of volunteering with the Paralympics and the Paralympians. And so I did basketball and swimming with those guys. So I was really fortunate to do a bit of overseas travel with the Paralympians before Atlanta, so in about 94. And if you're wanting to get into elite sport, you need to have overseas experience, and you need to be able to prove that you can be away from home and you can work extended hours and things like that without actually breaking down and all the rest of it. So one thing led to another, and I was able to actually apply for something because I had something else. So I applied for a few jobs, not just within swimming, but within basketball, netball, things like that. And I didn't get them, like, other people got them, because some of the travel was for a long time, and I had two small children, so I couldn't go for months on end. And then I got my first position in 94 for the Perth World Championships, and that was like a trial run. They sort of do take a couple of therapists to see how they perform. And on that first trip, I missed my plane home. So I thought, oh, that's not a good thing. So I got the times wrong. So, they let you do a few things to see how you toughen up, I guess. And then you literally apply like a job. You apply all the time. And I applied to go to Sydney in the main medical department, and I didn't get that position. I still had a position in with Hockey Australia and with swimming. So you sort of got to put your tentacles out, and I was pretty sure I was going with swimming, but in elite sport, nothing is guaranteed. And in those days, being a female was a real detraction, because mainly elite sport was males, and they could put all the physios and the doctors and the massage, all males, together in one area. Whereas if they've got a female, she has to have a separate room and, blah, blah, blah. In fact, I got taken off a hockey competition because they thought Jo was a boy, and they rang me to get my details to fly to Kuala Lumpur. And they said, we need to speak to Jo. And I was like, yeah, you're speaking to her. And they said, no, Jo Yeoman. And I said, yeah, that's me. And the guy said, you're female. Yeah. And he said, oh, no, that won't work, because everyone on the hockey team was male. I was the only female person. And their accommodation, it was one big house. So I'd have to share a room with the doctor. Fortunately for me, I actually knew the doctor. It was Peter Bequee. And I rang him and I said, oh, I'm not going to Perth now. And he said, what do you mean? I go, well, we had to share a room. And he goes, well, what's wrong with that? And I go, well, you're male. And he goes, and, like, it was just,
Like, what?
yeah, like, you look at it now and you think, how stupid is that? Like,
Yeah.
anyway, I couldn't go. They had to take they ended up taking a male doctor. So it was still really hard back then. Yeah.
And I think that's what really inspired me about your story, was just how much you've had to push through and persevere to get what you want. Like like you said, just like putting your tentacles out, going, I want to apply. If I want to apply, I've got to be there. I've got to take that action. I've got to step up. And that obviously led to incredible things throughout your career.
Yeah. And there were lots of times where things were really not so good, like in terms, there's a million and one things. And any female that works in any sort of industry can tell you it wasn't anything awful in terms of assault or anything on myself, but there were lots of discriminatory things that happened to me. And I just used to think, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and just treat everyone with kindness and just get on with it, and don't take that negative energy on board. And because really what you resist persists. So I just used to think, oh, well, yeah, okay, well, doesn't bother me. So I would just go on my own. So there were lots of times where I remember being in Korea on my own, being the manager as well as the myotherapist and massage therapist, on my own in a strange place with no one else to help me.
Yeah.
Like it just wouldn't happen like that now, like they're just, and nobody told me that our Australian phones don't work in Korea. You have to have Korean phones. I mean, I'm sure they do now, but back then they didn't. And so it was just really, a lot of the times it can be quite lonely. And I don't think people realise you give up a lot to, and I just call it the Titanic effect. On the surface, it looks like a little iceberg, but underneath, you're madly trying to keep everything together, and things are growing, and you just think it'll be okay. I'll get through this. I'll get through this. And I was lucky that after 2000, from about 2002, 2004, we were really lucky to have a great sports scientist in Victoria, Bernard Savage, and he's still, I think he's with hockey now. He was brilliant, and he could see everybody's ability and what work went in, and he was mortified that we were treated differently. So that was a really good turning point for me.
Yeah. And I think like we in this day and age, you would hope that things have changed. And that
Mm.
comes from people like yourself just standing at the coalface, constantly
Getting
challenging
up.
what's happening and standing up and just being involved anyway and pushing through until all of a sudden things have changed. And it doesn't
Yeah.
happen overnight.
And happy, and I think everyone has that imposter syndrome where they go, one day someone's going to wake up and go, she doesn't know what she's doing, or what's she doing here? Or so many times people would say to me, you don't look like you fit the profile. Everyone who's with elite sport is thin, and they've done it. They've done triathlons, and they're their own elite athlete themselves. And I was just a daggy mum from the suburbs with two kids who happened to really love what I did, so that didn't really go along with what people perceive you have to be, because elite sport is really hard work.
Yeah.
And the ones that make it look easy, you know, that's their life. That's all they do to make it look easy. Whereas, as you know, as mothers, we do the work, make it look easy, make the beds, cook the meals. It's a whole different thing. The other thing is too, is the discrimination about if a woman wants to do something and go away. I had lots of people say to me, you've done an Olympics, you've done a Commonwealth Games, you've worked with all these people, you've done it, why do you need to do it again? And it was like, would you say that to a man?
Yeah. No.
No.
And it's like, and your husband obviously supported you and looked after your girls like a legend that he is, because
And yet
look for their dad.
my husband is like Kenny the plumber. He is a plumber, and he is like Kenny the plumber. And I can tell you, I've got a son and a daughter, and they used to have massive blues when I'd go away because he would want to eat tea at this time and they'd need to be picked up. And I used to get phone calls overseas, and I'd have my mother on one end and my husband on the other end and my kids on another thing. And they'd all be saying, come home, Dad's done this, Mum's done. And I used to think, oh my Lord, just keep it together, keep it together. But what it does is uncomfortableness makes us step up. And if you don't step up, you ship out. And it got to a stage where my two children and my husband said, we've decided to make it a grandma-free zone. We can look after ourselves now. We don't want your mum here to help out. And so they then grew from that. And then my daughter said, Dad, fish chips are not a vegetable. Mum cooks these meals. You need to cook vegetables. So they all learn. Everybody learns stuff.
Yeah.
And if you don't ever push yourself over that edge, nobody ever learns. And as it is, my husband's a much better husband for it. His relationship with our kids is better, and they can have a banter and an argument, and everything's on the table. You may not like what gets said. And I'd come home and say, oh, I'm going away on such and such. And the kids would say, oh, I've got this concert on. Oh, and I would feel every woman has mother guilt. I don't think too many men go away with men guilt, father guilt. Whereas even to this day, you saw Joanne at the conference when we were at the conference, and she'd gone away to the Olympics, and she said, the job itself is easy. The tearing away from your children who don't understand why, even in this day and age, that is still there. It's still not an easy thing. Whereas a man comes home and says, I'm on the 6 o'clock flight tomorrow to Sydney. I'd come home and say, oh my God, I'm on the 6 o'clock flight to Sydney. I think I better go up tonight so that I can get there on time. It's a totally different thing. But it makes your life interesting, and everybody wants to talk to you because everybody wants to know what the gossip is of what's going on for whoever you're with. So it was always, I was just lucky, and I was lucky that I had the temperament that when awful things happened and people were awful, I just used to think, something must be going on in their life to take it out on me.
That's a huge amount of self-compassion to have, or compassion in action to have in that moment, to be able to reframe that as not take it personally, but actually, yeah, realize that we've all got stuff going on in a
Everyone.
Titanic. They might have a lot of deep icebergs going on in their life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just to
And
kind of let that, like Teflon, nothing's
yes.
Teflon. You just kind of let it fly and move on. And I can imagine how well that has served you in traveling overseas and having to just be adaptable to your surroundings.
And look, there, I used to often say to people, there are brilliant therapists out there, much better than me, but they're their own worst enemy because they believe in their own, what they tell themselves. They're
Mm.
not open. You learn something every single day. Every day somebody does something and I think, oh, I didn't know about that. I didn't know about that. I think you need to just be like a sponge. And what doesn't work on one person works on another. And the longer you're a therapist, something that you learnt 30 years ago comes back in fashion
Yeah.
and then goes out. And then something, and you can do the same treatment on some person and it works 100%. And they say, oh my God, you're a God. And you think, oh, what did I do then? And then you can do the same thing on someone else and they go, that didn't work. And it's just, I actually used to call myself a fence sitter. I have 50 cents each way. I just try and juggle and just try and do the best. My outcome's always been, it's not about me. It's about making sure the person who comes has the best experience possible. And when you walk in the door and you start treating, you leave all the other stuff behind
Yep.
because it is madness on the other side.
Yeah. Leave your shit at the door and come to work.
Yeah, yeah, come to
Leave
work.
that there. You know what? And that's, I used to teach that to my staff as well. It's like we
Yeah,
care about one another. However, we leave it at the door. We come
yeah,
to work. We serve our clients because
yeah,
it's about showing up. And it used to worry me when I was a baby therapist. Like, why do I treat the same condition four different ways in a day and I don't even think about it? Does that
yeah,
make me wrong? Maybe I'm
yeah,
I'm not a good therapist. And it's like, no, it's actually what made me exceptional because
yeah.
you just
Because you can
adapt.
change.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, I can do that and this, and if that doesn't work, well then we'll refer to someone else. Like, who cares? The purpose is the client feels well and feels got and is in a great place. Then that's what we want. That's the ultimate goal.
And the other thing that always used to gobsmack me is I was always of the opinion that we only have two hands. We can only treat so many people. There are thousands of people out there, and what I do may not suit someone else. So never be. I used to have a couple of therapists that were like hungry, like if the phone rang, they dive on the phone, or if, they were always trying to steal people's patience, and people wouldn't go on holidays because they'd think they'd come back and have no patience. Whereas I used to always be kind, like I'd treat everyone like they were my kids or like they were my best friend, and I would have people say to me, "What's your ulterior motive? Like, what's in it for you? What?" And it'd be like, this is how I want my life to be. I want my practice to be like it's a little bit of Dalesford or it's a little bit. We spend so much time in our practice. It has to be a really good practice. People have to like each other. You can't have. And I remember I ended up having like 13 staff. And we had a couple of hard people. And in the end, I had our bookkeeper come in on a Sunday because she used to cheese off too many people, but she was terrific at her job. But in the end, sometimes you find some of the best therapists, you have to let them go because they don't. It isn't about you being the best person to walk on water. It's about being a team. And that if I want to go away, that I know that you're Alicia, you can look after my client and my client will feel just as loved and just as cared for.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. And the more therapists that learn like that, rather than try to make themselves the next messiah, they'll be in the industry longer. Whereas often you find they come in like comets and they're just brilliant and they burn out because they're just, yeah, they just crash and burn and they don't ride the wave and they don't take not criticism, but they don't take oh, maybe you could try this and even I did a lot of work on how to speak to my staff and sometimes, sorry. And sometimes I would actually find, got my phone, my watch is on now. I would find that I could say to you, you know what, Alicia, it's not so busy today. Why don't you come in later and have a sleep in or spend the morning with your kids or whatever it is? And you'd go, oh, thanks for that. Now you'd be on a wage. I wouldn't be docking you. I'd just be saying it's quiet now, la, la, la. I could say the same thing to another therapist And she would actually take me out the back into our room and say, don't you ever bring up my work conditions in front of anybody else. And it'd be like, what work conditions? Like, what are you talking about? And she'd say, if you're going to change my hours, you need to put it in right. You know that. So I was always. It didn't matter. Sometimes it doesn't matter what you do. You can never say the right thing to someone. So for those therapists that are really good, they have to go. They're
And
too hard.
you just got to make that decision, don't you? Just
Yeah.
go, you know what, this is not worth it, because what we're allowing in that often then plays out. It's like, if I'll put up with them, that was what a lot of therapists do. They'll put up with it because they're a good therapist and everyone
Mm,
likes them and clients like them.
mm.
However, what I'll say, the challenge I give is that you're then allowing that behavior. You're saying
Yeah,
it's
you're
okay to show
actually
up like that.
you're actually praising and rewarding that behaviour. And then all that happens with that, because through experience I knew what happened with that. Down in Victoria we have the road tolls. And what happened with me is that I gave a little more and gave a little more. And then all of a sudden that person wanted the toll money to come to work. And I said, but someone comes from Werribee, like that's a lot further than you. But she doesn't have to pay a toll. I said, well, I pay for all the training and we do, I'm a very generous boss. There's always food. And I said, oh, I think that's a little much. And she said, well, I'm leaving if you don't do that. And I thought, wow, we do all this and you're leaving because I'm not going to pay a $3 toll. So she did leave. And same thing, everywhere I leave or anyone who leaves, it's always very happy. She only left for a month. She got a job in South Melbourne and she rang up and said, can I come back? And I said, of course you can come back. You're a great therapist. I'm not paying your road tolls. She goes, I get it. Because where she went, she wasn't allowed to use their computer. They had no lunchroom. She wasn't allowed to do, like it's not, sometimes you have to look at the bigger picture and say, it's not about what person I'm treating. It's about how I'm getting treated as a whole. You're in a job for 8 hours a day sometimes. Sometimes you're in a job more than you're at home with your family.
Yeah.
So that's why I had staff for 10 years. I closed my practice down. I owned the building and I sold the building. And I couldn't get any of my staff to take on. They could have stayed there and ran the business. I didn't want anything. They could have just stayed there. But nobody wanted to take it on. Nobody wanted to take the responsibility. And one of them had been with me for 10 years. She goes, what am I going to do? And I go, there's lots of people out there, but yeah, it's just everything has a season and a reason.
And that's right. And sometimes it's like we've just got to enjoy the time that we have, and this is where we're heading. And then something else comes along, and that it tends to. And I'm sure all of them have found places to land now
Mm,
on the other side of that. And it's often it can be a tricky journey, but being able to create a really intentional culture and having things in place that are the things that we would have liked as practitioners, and where we were working somewhere, like it'd be lovely to have that kind of things available. That's amazing to be able to do. And so, what are you doing now? What are you?
So what am I doing now? And now I've got to have a bit of an op on my back, so I'm gonna do that, and that'll put me out for a couple of months. I'm trying to develop a skin awareness program for massage therapists, because we're the only people that really see full bodies and see them on a regular basis. It's getting out of that procrastination self of I've got all the information. It's a matter of getting it up and going, marketing, getting on board, all of that. The teaching of it is easy. That's the easy part. It's all the other stuff, as you well know, of getting that done. I don't want to grow my practice or anything like that. I think there's a real need for better teaching out there, and we lose so many therapists because they just don't get taught the right way. And it isn't even sometimes that you have to know exactly where that muscle joins or what attachment that is or what it does or what it innervates. It's actually about making connection with a client. And I always used to call it Towel 101. So you get some therapists and they don't even know how to drape properly or keep a person warm, or there's a whole lot of stuff that is chopped off, and we can nurture really good therapists, and I think there's a real gap for that. So I sort of think that's my next thing.
Yeah.
Or study. I just sort of think there's, when you just go, it's a bit of a plethora. For the first time in my life, I don't have any demanding things on me. So then it's like, where do I start?
So many great options in
I
there.
know.
It's great, isn't it?
Yes, yes, yes. So, and I think the trick is to be able to still work in massage, but that's the little bit as you get older. How long have you been massaging for?
24 years this year.
Yeah, so you develop the burnout, you need to have another link that you can extend and keep going and going. Like it's just because I do think we lose a lot of people and that information just gets lost. And the other thing too to point out is when I first started, there were no massage clinics around. Now every corner has 4 Chinese massage clinics around, Chinese things. And a lot of them are trained better now. We took on a program at one of the TAFE, I was teaching it. But now, with everyone wanting instantaneous things, people will say, oh, I don't want to wait a week to see that person. I'm going to walk in and see that person now. Oh, maybe I can't claim my benefits. The difference that's changed now is when those places first opened, they were cheap.
Yeah.
They were $40 or $50. Now you can walk in and be treated by someone untrained and they charge you $110. I think we do have to address that. And some of that sort of stuff, I think, is different. And even being in a practice on your own, I think the home practice is actually seen upon as being more acceptable now because of COVID, because I think a lot of people did have to move home. Just the costs and the overheads. I always worked in a practice where I bought the building. That was my super, if you like. Whereas these days that's financially not very realistic. But at the same time, a lot of places charge too much money for rent. They treat massage therapists or myotherapists like physios, or where they're seeing 4 or 5 people in an hour. A massage therapist might see one person and have different prices for different things. So that moving forward, there has to be a change in the way I think massage therapists are treated. But at least now they're treated with respect, and I think they're seen as a really big cog in the wheel of wellness and health. And there's a big industry in wellness. So, I'm on the Mornington Peninsula. It's just a smorgasbord of where you could go. If I was young and if someone could invent Barbie arms where you could click off your arms and put on massage arms and go to work, that would be really easy because there's so much work down here.
Yeah.
And there's lots of not so good therapists massaging and people getting charge prices. But it's interesting because people are happy to pay $300 for a massage in a spa or in a fancy place and go, oh, that therapist wasn't that good. They would never do it if you came to a clinic. They wouldn't pay you. Like they'd walk out. So some of that irks me a bit because I think, but anyway, I don't know how you change that. I think it's the experience as opposed to people going for an experience as opposed to going for a treatment.
Yeah. And I think too, just even calling out some of the challenges we have and then being able to see, this is a problem we all face. We all have to be part of the solution. And again, I think it comes from people like yourself who were pioneered from the 70s, but the fact that you can even at school now, remedial massage is part of an option to go and study as a completely normal career path. You can go and do a VM, vocational major, and instead of your VCE in Victoria, and allied health cert 2 is part of that, which leads into remedial massage. And I not that my kids want to study that but I was like, yay, it's an option.
It's an option.
How amazing is that for the longevity of our career?
Yeah, and the other thing that's really interesting in terms of evolution, when I studied at RMIT, myself and another lady, Jo-Anne, and another lady that I've forgotten her name, we actually started the Myotherapy Association. So I was like number 20 or something, there were 20 of us and I was number 20. And then they actually wouldn't let me stay joined when someone took over. They didn't consider that the original myotherapists were myotherapists, even though we did an extra year longer and we did other subjects. Just the hierarchy just got rid of all the original myotherapists. And I was always a massage and myotherapy member, so it didn't matter for me. But I remember thinking, we started that. Like, how could you I've still got my original certificate. And I remember going back to try and join and they said, oh, no, you don't qualify. And I thought, how rude is that? And we were part of allied health. When we were first graduating, there in the Hospital Federation, there's Hospital Employees Federation #1 branch, and that's who occupational health and physios and that's who they used to belong to when they worked in a hospital. And when we first graduated that's who we had to belong to, that union, because I used to do work in hospitals. And then all of a sudden one day that we just weren't allowed to be in there. And yet I'd been a member there for about 5 years. So it doesn't matter. It didn't matter. But I just think, what's that got to do about it? Like, we didn't evolve to get better. Like now we're not with I've forgotten what the health board is, but like when with COVID, had we have been part of the health thing, we would have been able to continue to work. But because we weren't considered important. And a lot of my work is post-operative. I use low-level lasers for healing, photomodulation of healing and wound scar and all that sort of stuff. So a lot of my stuff was actually important, but I wasn't allowed to work. And I actually got sent a notice to desist because I was working when we weren't allowed to work. And I thought, had we have been still part of some bigger organisation, the HE or whatever it is, we would have been considered important. And I thought that was a bit of a shame. Although I know there's drawbacks if you're part of the what's the name of that long thing? It's a long.
Yeah.
Yeah, APRA. Yeah. There's drawbacks on that because they can regulate different things, but I don't know about that. I know physiotherapists that do specialised migraine work and they charge $200 a treatment. Well, nobody tells them what to charge. Like it's just. So I don't know. I think that's something moving forward we need to be seen in a better light. And I guess the accreditation process, becoming along doing those lines will make things better. Probably not for my lifetime, but for the ones that are coming through now, I think. And I think the bad thing is the thing I don't like about the Bachelor of Myotherapy is that those kids are let out into an industry where they think they're different and they're better than everyone else. And unfortunately, they may very well be in our sector, but no physio, chiro, osteo doctor thinks that they are. So they get very let down and often leave because they feel they're not recognised. So that's quite sad.
Yeah. And I think, again, just thinking back to the way that you have forged through those challenges yourself, lots of them are not going to be resolved. There's also, I think, your attitude of, that's hard, step in, that's hard, not only step in, but keep showing up until it gets easier.
Yeah.
We can have more of that in our industry.
Yeah. And
actually what's going to change the game.
And I just think you just go in and you feel the uncomfortableness and you go, oh, that was not a good day. Someone make me a cup of tea, and then you just get through it and you feel a bit awful and then the next day you wake up and it's okay. Yeah. And I think being able to absorb it and then let it go and not take it on. And the biggest learning thing is for all of us is a lot of it isn't personal. A lot of it is just deflection. And if you can stand the deflection and be a bit Teflon-y and just hold your ground, you'll get there. Like, you don't have to be fantastic at anatomy and physiology and just the best trigger point person and the best dry needler. In some ways, being average, being the tortoise actually gets you there because you are resilient. And it's about getting to become resilient, taking on the grief and sometimes even the humiliation and the shame of not perhaps being as educated as some people that you're working with and go, wow, and going, but I'm actually a nice person and I'm okay. And I have all these other qualities that I bring to my palette, so I'm okay. Yeah. And people need to tell themselves that. And I think in our industry, not enough of that goes on. And
it's often not spoken about. It's like we only hear from the people who really they've got their stuff together. They seem to know everything.
Yeah.
And yet, us being able to go, what, there are times where I'm not the fount of all knowledge. I don't actually know everything. And that's my greatest learning because, like you've shared, just being curious. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, and my grandma used to say, knowledge isn't a burden. You just learn something new and learn something new and learn something new. Joanne, I'm mindful of time. I know that you're a busy woman, so thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
And thank you.
Appreciate you coming on board and making this time for us to be able to connect. And thank you so much for sharing your story and for all that you have forged in our industry for us and where we are.
And same back to you. Thank you for going outside of your comfort zone and writing a book and getting up there and standing up there. Because sometimes when you start, it's only one person listening and then one person tells another person. So it's really hard to put yourself out there and not everyone does it. So that's a really brave thing to do. So thanks. And hopefully maybe one day we'll get to work together.
I look forward to it. Sounds great.
All righty. Have a great weekend.
You too.